Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our 22nd session for the PD in Your Pocket series. And this is our second session for 2023. I can see there's still people coming in, so I will wait a couple of minutes before we get started. Thank you, everyone, for taking time this evening to come and join us to talk about such an important topic. This is our session on safe sleep in family daycare. My name is Elizabeth Go, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you for this session this evening, and I will be your presenter. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country we meet on today. I know we are on many different lands with many traditional owners. I am currently presenting from the land of the Gadigal and Wangal people, and I would like to acknowledge them and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that Indigenous families have cared and educated children on these lands for tens of thousands of years, and First Nation people have their own customs and traditions for putting children to sleep. And I believe we can share in our services and within our practice those traditions. I know that there are some beautiful Aboriginal lullabies and traditional music from the Torres Strait that we could be playing in rest times. And that would just be one way to acknowledge those traditions. Now, before we get into the content of tonight's session, I just want to do a little bit of a recap before we get started, in case you are new to PD in Your Pocket. So the first thing is after you registered, you would have got an information booklet. This resource booklet is especially prepared for the session tonight and covers a lot of the fantastic content that we're going to talk about. So you've had a bit of a time to go over this before tonight's session. If you didn't receive it, you can see the link on the screen that is at the top there, and this will remain available on our website, so you can go and access that and download it, as will tonight's session. So after the session, it will be uploaded if you'd like to view anything again, including our interview. We really encourage you to read through this booklet as it provides a great overview of all of tonight's session. And you can also keep it for a useful resource for later on. Then we have the professional development section, which is tonight's webinar. And you may be participating in this as the live webinar with me now, or watching it later as a video, or listening to it as a podcast. So if you're participating in it live, remember that you can always go to the PD Pocket website, as I mentioned, if you'd like to look at anything again. And we'll also have a short interview during this session, which will be available as a recording as well on our website. Lastly, I just want to remind you that we do have our closed Facebook group, which has a great following from educators, family daycare educators. And it's a great place where you can share ideas, discuss the topics of each month, share what you're doing at your service and see what other people are doing at theirs. So if you haven't already, I really encourage you to join the Facebook group. And of course, if you have any questions about PD in Your Pocket, you can email us at info@nswfdc.org.au. Okay, and as always, when you register, we do ask you some questions, and I'd love to share the responses with you now before we get into our content. So the first session was, when did you last review your sleep and rest policy? Now, 20% of you said over 12 months ago, and 80% of you said in the last 12 months, which is a fantastic outcome there. So well done for keeping your policies and procedures up to date and current. It's very important that we constantly review those, and we'll discuss a bit more about why that's important tonight. Our next question for you was, how often do you access information from Red Nose, either for yourself or your families? So the results came back, 13% said that you have not accessed resources before. 33% often, 37% said once or twice, and 17% said very often, and I'm subscribed to their newsletters. So it'd be great if after tonight's session, you can definitely go away and subscribe to Red Nose newsletters and just check their amazing resources. We'll talk about a bit about them tonight. They've got fantastic resources available on their page. So it'll be great if we can get everyone engaging with those. Our next question was, do you feel comfortable providing advice to your families around safe sleep practices? Now, 96 of you said yes and 4% said no. So hopefully with some great information and support this evening, we could get that to 100% because it's a really important part of our role as educational leaders, as family daycare educators, to make sure that we're always supporting our families and providing them with great advice on safe sleep practices. Our next question for you is, what area of safe sleep do you feel most confident in? So the results to this was really interesting. 2% said how to support families. 22% said knowing each child's individual needs. 28% said safe sleep environments. 21% said safe sleep equipment. So that's your cots, beds, mattresses. And 26% said supervision. Then the next question we had was, what areas of safe sleep do you feel you need to learn more about? So not feeling that confident in. 33% said how to support families. 17% said knowing each child's individual needs. 21% said safe sleep environments. 16% said safe sleep equipment. And 12% said supervision. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of where everyone's knowledge and understanding is sitting tonight. And it also gives us a really good idea of what areas we need to focus on and what you're already feeling quite confident in. So thank you to everyone who registered, who took the time to participate in those quick questions. It gives us a great insight. All right, so let's get started. So I've got a bit of an overview here of what we will be covering this evening. We're going to look at why safe sleep is so important. We'll look at the laws, regulations, and the NQS, which is always a good place to start. And it's always something that we look at first, as this really lays the foundations for our knowledge and what we need to be focusing on. It really sums up compliance and best practice for us. We're then going to look at safe sleep strategies. So that's things like supervision, equipment, environment, and knowing each child as an individual, because this plays a very important part in what we do. We're going to look at tips for preparing safe sleep policies and procedures, supporting families in your care, sector changes for sleep and rest in 2023. We know that there has been quite a lot of updates in the last 12 months. And then finally, further support available for educators. So what you can do after tonight's session to continue to develop your knowledge. And at any stage, you are welcome to put in questions, and we will have a section for questions. We'll have a bit of time at the end of tonight's session to go through any questions. Okay, so let's first look at why is safe sleep so important. Now, we know when children have optimal rest and sleep, this greatly impacts their abilities to learn. It helps them regulate their emotions. It assists them in engaging with their peers in a social way, in a positive way. It allows them to participate in their learning environments and achieve their developmental outcomes. So just like adults, children depend on sleep to achieve their full potential. And that's why safe sleep and rest is so important. As family daycare educators, we have a duty of care to ensure that we do everything possible for the health, safety, and well-being of children. The safe sleep practices that are mandated in early childhood education are based on years of evidence-based practice and extensive research. So if you're wondering where all this information has come from, it is based on a lot of research, and that is why it's so important that we follow these guidelines and also the compliance. Now, the compliance around safe sleep is there to assist us in protecting children from the known risks associated with sleep and rest. So as a sector, we are becoming more aware and more proactive around ensuring safe sleep practices. And with a lot of fantastic support and education available for educators, including, of course, tonight's session. Now, there has been a noticeable reduction in sudden unexpected death in infants, so SUDI deaths across Australia in recent decades. And I'd like to personally thank you for taking the time to be here tonight to further your knowledge on safe sleep and rest practices. As family daycare educators who continually engage in professional development, you are playing a key role in engaging in ensuring that we can continue to reduce SUDI cases. So while it does remain a high-risk area, we know the risk factors, and there are very clear steps that can be taken to reduce and sometimes remove those risks, which we're going to go through tonight. And we do have very high levels of registered participants tonight, which just shows exactly how important this topic is and how willing family daycare educators are in engaging in this topic. They want to do better, they want to learn more. And so for that, we really thank you for coming along tonight. Okay, so as I mentioned, a good starting point is to always review the compliance that is required. The national laws and regulations should always lay the foundations for our practice, service management, and personal conduct as family daycare educators. They also set clear expectations for the families in your care. So if the families are aware of the laws and regulations, they'll know exactly what to expect from your care. As you may already be aware, Red Nose Australia is the national authority on safe sleep for babies and children. Approved providers, nominated supervisors, and educators should always design their policies and practices in consultation with recommendations, guides, and advice from Red Nose. The regulatory authority and ASIQA work closely with Red Nose to ensure all guidelines and requirements are backed by evidence-based practice and research. And that's why the information you're receiving tonight is so important and so valid, because it is evidence-based and it's based on years of research. So on the slide here, I have a table of legislation that relates to safe sleep and rest. Some are directly related to sleep and rest, while others are indirectly linked to the requirements. So some key legislation that I'd like to point out include Section 1673 of the law. So a family daycare educator must ensure that every reasonable precaution is taken to protect a child being educated and cared for as part of a family daycare service from harm and from any hazard likely to cause injury. So that's a very umbrella law. It covers many things, but it's really relevant to safe sleep and rest because it's ensuring that all family daycare educators take every reasonable precaution, and that's against hazards or anything that may cause injury. Another one I want to point out, Regulation 81.3. A family daycare educator must take reasonable steps to ensure that the needs for sleep and rest of children being educated and cared for by the educator as part of a family daycare service are met, having regard to the child's age, development stages, and individual needs of the child. And we're going to talk about that in quite a lot of detail later on, why it's so important to know the child as an individual, know each child's individual circumstances, any health requirements they may have, where they're up to in their development. These are all very important things to consider that relate back to safe sleep and rest. And the last one I want to bring to your attention, Regulation 168(2), and this is in Section A, requires services to have policies and procedures relating to children's sleep and rest. So we must have policies and procedures in place for safe sleep and rest. And then you can see there that there are several other regulations that relate closely to safe sleep and rest. That includes 115 and 165 of the law. They relate to supervision, which is very important. We also have Regulation 103 and 105. They relate to equipment. And Regulation 110, which is all about ventilation and natural light. So that's where we go into looking at the environment and what kind of environment we're providing these children for their sleep and rest. Okay, and then when looking at compliance, we must also be guided by the national quality standards, and that's also very important for best practice as well. So the two quality areas that are most relevant to sleep and rest are quality area 2 and 3. In particular, 2.1.1, wellbeing and comfort. Each child's wellbeing and comfort is provided for, including appropriate opportunities to meet each child's need for sleep, rest and relaxation. 2.2.1, supervision. At all times, reasonable precautions and adequate supervision ensures children are protected from harm and hazard. And of course, that includes supervision at rest time. And quality area 3, 3.1.2, premises, furniture and equipment are safe, clean and well maintained. So all very important points when looking at safe sleep and rest. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of the compliance requirements, let's now look at how these link to our safe sleep strategies. The first one being supervision. How can we achieve adequate supervision? There are many effective strategies that can be used depending on the age group of the children in care. So adequate supervision means regularly conducting physical checks on children. So for sleeping children, regular physical checks should be made, for example, every 10 minutes for children under 2 years of age. And the circumstances and needs of each child in care should be assessed to determine any risk factors that may mean physical checks are needed more regularly. So depending on that individual child, you may need to do them more regularly. Now, a physical check includes looking at the rise and the fall of the chest, taking note of their skin color and the color of their lips. And this should be done preferably, of course, without disturbing the child. We don't want to wake them or interrupt their sleep. We want them to have good quality sleep, but we need to ensure that they are physical checks so that we're actually going in, being very close with the child, monitoring, observing the rise and fall of their chest, looking at the color of their lips and their skin and taking all those things into consideration. It's really important that we don't substitute physical checks with audio monitors or video monitors or motion sensors. I know there's a lot of high-tech things out there now that are there in a way, I guess, to replace supervision, but this cannot be the case, especially not as family daycare educators. So those things in no way should be replacing our physical checks. Checks should be done by the side of the cot or the floor mattress if you've got toddlers or older children, and always be within sight and hearing distance of sleeping children. So you don't want to be too far from them. We want to prepare for additional supervision or more regular checks if we have children with medical conditions, developmental needs, sleep issues, or any child that could be recovering from an illness. So if we know we've had a child that's been away recently, they may be well enough to come back, but they may still be recovering in some way. They may require a bit of additional supervision. So what do you need to know as an educator? If you are responsible for supervising sleeping or resting children or doing checks, ensure that you're not distracted by other activities or have multiple responsibilities at this time. So another important point is to ensure that you know what to do if something goes wrong. So ensure that you are up to date with your first aid training, including CPR, and that your safe sleep and rest policies and procedures should reflect the unique layout of your family daycare. So making sure they're really contextualized to your service, to your home, and making sure you know what to do in the unlikely event that something does go wrong. And then just to cover the points on the slide there, so the New South Wales Regulatory Authority defines adequate supervision in the following key points. So you can respond immediately, particularly if a child is distressed or in a hazardous situation. Knowing where children are at all times and monitoring actively and diligently. So not being distracted, not letting too much time go by between your physical checks. So making sure that you've got things in place, whether it be checklists or timers, reminders somehow to make sure that's being done. And actively monitoring each child during sleep and rest with the ability to see and hear them. So being physically close to them as well. Okay, so on the next slide here, I have a sample cot room check. So as a family daycare educator, you will need to be able to show evidence that checks have been made of sleeping children. So a checklist like this one can be evidence of the time the check was done, which children were checked, the date, and your signature. So this should be done at the time of the check and not retrospectively. So it's no good coming back at the end of a 2-hour sleep and filling in every 10-minute section. You really need to do them at the time the checks were done. Again, remember, a sufficient check includes being physically next to the child's cot or bed, so not checking from a distance or not checking through a window, not via camera or monitors. It has to be a physical check every 10 minutes or more frequently, depending on the child's circumstances and needs. And the check, again, including watching the rise and fall of the child's chest and looking at their lip and their skin color. A record like this, like the one on the screen here, this example, supports your sleep and rest procedure, which would have further detail and information on what needs to be checked and how. So this is just a very basic template to show you an example, but you would have a procedure and of course a policy with a lot more detail around what's happening. Now, over the next few slides, we will focus on the importance of how to check the room, how to check the cot and the bedding, so the equipment, and knowing each child's circumstances. And you can also adapt the sleep checklist for different age groups as well. So you may have one for your 0 to 2-year-olds, one for your slightly older toddlers, and one for any preschool children who are no longer sleeping but may still obviously require supervision when they're resting. Okay, so this image is from Red Nose, Making Up a Baby's Cot. It's from their Making Up a Baby's Cot poster, and it's a great visual reminder to have up in your family daycare service. You could keep it next to your cots or your designated sleeping area, and it's just a great visual record of things that we need to ensure is happening. So a reminder not to use pillows, doonas, soft toys, especially children under the age of 2, not having children sleep in a waterbed or a beanbag, making sure baby's feet are positioned at the bottom of the cot, tucking in all blankets, making sure you've got a nice firm mattress. It's just a really good overview that you could have up in your sleep space. Okay, so next we have here another strategy for family daycare educators is to implement a risk assessment for sleep and rest. So in the same way we do risk assessments for events such as excursions, A risk assessment can assist us in identifying risks that could occur. So the risk assessment can be created specifically for your service and home and personalised to the needs of the child in your care or the children in your care. So remember, once you have completed a risk assessment, it needs to be continually reviewed. So if there's changes to the children in your care, changes to your home environment, if you come into new information, maybe a child develops a new medical condition, you will need to constantly review these risk assessments. So they're not to be set and forget. We need to constantly review. So just like policies and procedures, you can review them, you can set dates to review them, or you can just make a note that they will be reviewed as things change. I also want to note that this risk assessment sample is just a sample, and you would need to review the content as an educator and as a service to make sure that it's meeting the needs of your home and that it's contextualized to the children in your care. So for the sake of tonight's presentation, this is just a sample. So sample risk assessment for sleeping and rest. So this one has some children listed in there, the children in care at the time of the assessment, and it includes their age. You'll also see there under child 2, Liam, 3 years, it's got his medical condition, so anaphylaxis. So that's something really important that we would include in our sample risk assessment. Description of sleeping arrangements. So we're making sure that we have a dedicated sleep room area. So for this family daycare educator, it looks like it's their lounge room. Sleep on mats on floor with own sheets supplied by parents, and sleep in cots. So all cots are meet Australian safety standards. And we'll talk about safety standards in a little bit. Monitor in use, yes, in both rooms, sound only. However, this is not replacing the physical checks. This educator is just using a sound monitor as an additional tool. And it's also got their educator completed safe sleep training, yes. And it's been signed off by the coordinator and the educator. And then it lists some hazards identified. It then says, using the risk matrix, it says how likely it is to occur and the consequences if it did occur. And then it gives you a risk assessment outline. So green is low risk. Amber is medium risk, still requires some kind of action to try and mitigate or reduce that risk. And red is obviously high risk, so it needs to be actioned. So if we go through an example here let's have a look at sleep area 1. So one of the hazards identified is overheating. The likelihood they've put possible and the consequences are major. So that's then being flagged as red in the risk assessment. So the response is to use a video monitor with a temperature reading. So a lot of those monitors now, and you can just get room temperature monitors by itself as well. So that would just be one tool to use. There's a room fan that can be turned on if it's a really warm day, and making sure that we're only using appropriate bedding. So nice, light, breathable cotton bedding to respond to that risk. So you can see there's some really good examples there of different things that you can respond to. Another example in sleep area 2, it says insufficient light to do sleep checks adequately. Likelihood likely, consequence moderate, so it's come up as amber. So they're going to eliminate or put in a control measure. They're going to get a night light to always be installed and left on while children are sleeping, so that the educator is able to note those things like colour of the lips, colour of the skin, rise and fall of the chest. So you can see how just a simple risk assessment like this can be really effective in not only identifying potential hazards, but how we then control or eliminate those. Okay, and just a couple of really important points to look at. And this is looking at what to do before you walk away, especially if you've got the children in a separate sleeping area. First, we're going to check the room. So this is talking about the environment. So we don't want to position the cot too close to curtain cords or decorations. I know a lot of people like to decorate their sleep areas with beautiful bunting or lights that require cables hanging down, fairy lights. But we need to be really careful that these aren't going against everything that's advised by Red Nose and by the governing bodies that give us all this fantastic advice about safe sleep. So we need to make sure that we're not contradicting any of that. So not positioning the cot too close to curtain cords or decorations. It only takes a second for a child to reach up and pull down cables or cords. Also consider getting your cot away from anywhere that might have potential dangerous objects that could be fallen down, that could be pulled down and fall on their head. After we check the room, we're going to check the cot and the bed. So a sleeping bag or a single tucked in sheet is all that you need for children 0 to 2 years. So no pillows, sheepskins, doonas, bumpers, none of those things should be present. If you remember the image that we showed from Red Nose, that child was on a firm mattress. There were no cot bumpers, no teddies, and no pillows. Then we're going to check the child. So remove all choking hazards from the child. That might be if they're wearing a hoodie that may have pull strings, tops with cords, dummy cords, teething necklaces. I know that a lot of children have those amber teething necklaces. All of that needs to be removed before sleep and rest. They can tighten during sleep and make breathing really difficult and become a choking hazard if swallowed. So we're going to check the room, check the cot or bed, and check the child. And we'll do this as a quick scan every time that we're putting the child down, because putting the child down to sleep, because things can change in the environment without us noticing. So we need to be doing this each time. Okay, now I mentioned the Australian standards before, so we'll have a quick look at this. And this is the second key area we need to focus on in safe sleep is safe equipment, and that plays a really important part. So as family daycare educators, this may include cots, beds, mattresses, and bedding. Unfortunately, tragic events have occurred with children in care due to inappropriate equipment used and poor quality sleep environments provided. So your cot mattress needs to meet Australian standards. And I'm sure that you're aware, but no sleeping in prams, bouncers, car seats, capsules. Children need to be on firm mattresses in a safe cot. Pillows are only suitable once they're over the age of 2 years. And floor mattresses are best for children who have outgrown a cot. So the rule of thumb is as soon as a child can start climbing out of their cot by themselves or showing signs to, they need to be moved to safer bedding so that they eliminate that risk of them falling out. If an educator elects to use a porta cot, so those portable cots you can see on the screen there, the black one, it must meet the Australian safety standards and must be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions with no additional padding added. So just as it's provided by the manufacturer is how it should be used. The use of porta cots is also limited for use by a child of no more than 15 kilos in weight. So if the child exceeds 15 kilos, they need to be moved to a more appropriate bedding, and that is from Red Nose. So I've got a table there that states the mandatory Australian standards for cots and for portable folding cots. And then there's also the voluntary Australian standard for sleep surfaces. So that's referring to your mattresses. the cot mattresses that you use. And mattresses should be firm and flat with no more than 2 centimetre gap between the mattress sides and the ends when fitted inside the cot. So what you don't want is big, more than 2 centimetres gap between the mattress and the inside of the cot, because that's where we can see limbs getting lodged, or parts of the child's baby or the child's body or the baby's body getting lodged and stuck. So making sure your mattress fits in really well into the cot. So to assist us in ensuring we have high quality and safe equipment and standards, we can ensure we purchase items that meet the Australian standards. So when you are purchasing items or equipment, making sure that it does meet those Australian standards. So standards and the law, just to touch on that, on their own, standards are voluntary and there is no requirement for the public to comply with standards. However, state and Commonwealth governments often refer to Australian standards within their legislation. And when this happens, that's when it becomes mandated. So the ECEC laws and regulations refer to the standards, and that's when it becomes mandated. Okay, and then if you have slightly older children, we move to the floor mattresses or these little bunk or camp beds that we often see. So for children who have outgrown a cot, the safest option is a low to the ground toddler bed or floor mattress. And these prevent children sustaining injury from rolling off sleep surfaces from a height. So even really thinking about whether it's suitable for them to be on an adult bed. Children should not be put to sleep on couches or adult beds for that reason. They're too high, and if the child was to roll off, they would sustain an injury. Children over 2 can have a pillow or light bedding, and it should be provided that as long as it's appropriate to the room temperature. So depending on the temperature outside, usually a light blanket or a cotton sheet suffices. Okay, so that's all of our information on safe equipment. We're now going to look at positive environments for sleep and rest. Now we can look at the suitability of the environment by using a simple checklist like the one on the slide here. So when we're looking at the area or the space that we're putting children to sleep or providing them to rest, we look at adequate light to see the children. So we noted that in our risk assessment before. So it must be light enough to see the children. Adequate ventilation, so making sure there is fresh air. We want it to be uncluttered. If it's really cluttered, it's only going to introduce more hazards, whether that be tripping hazards or for children to be playing with things at rest time, putting them in their mouth. No hanging cords, wall hangings that could fall, decorations like canopies. I know they're beautiful, but we have to be so mindful of the risks that can come with those things. If they're pulled down or if the cables get wrapped around a child's neck, we have to be mindful. Separate dedicated sleep area that's still easily accessible. So it is preferable to have a separate area for sleeping, but it needs to still be accessible. You need to still be able to hear and see the children and get to them easily. And then for older children, something I always like to mention is being mindful of personal space. They need to have space away from their peers to relax. It can often be very tempting for them to continue to engage in conversation and keep whispering and chatting. And so rather than, having them all squashed together in a row on their little camp beds, try and disperse them around the room, break them up a bit with using furniture as dividers, just to give them their own space so they can really switch off, even if they're not going to sleep. It's important just to have some time. And I find that when you do that, when you separate them a bit, they tend to be more likely to go off and have their imagination time and drift off and daydream. And then they come back a lot better rested. So when considering the environment, the next thing we also look at is temperature. So the temperature of the room and of the child is another important factor for safe sleep and rest, especially for infants. So babies control their temperature through their face and through their head. Therefore, it's imperative that educators sleep baby on their back with their head and face uncovered to prevent baby from overheating. Children should be dressed suitably for the room temperature, and it's important for educators to observe, monitor, and make changes. So that's part of your physical check as well. When you're going every 10 minutes to check the rise and fall of the chest, looking at the skin and the lip color, also being mindful of the temperature of the room and how the child is feeling. And if you are unsure, you can have a gentle feel of the child to see what they're feeling, if they're feeling very cold or if they're feeling quite warm. As a guide, it's recommended that you dress baby as you would dress yourself when you're going to sleep, comfortably warm, not too hot and not too cool. And a good way to check baby's temperature is to feel baby's back or tummy. So it's quite normal for children to have cool hands and feet, so best not to use these as your guide. If baby is showing any signs of heat stress, so they're coming across as really flushed or red or clammy, remove some of the bedding or clothing. Also keep in mind that if a child is unwell, this can impact their ability to regulate their body temperature. So they may have a fever or they may feel chills. Educators should always follow their illness and exclusion policies, as sick children are much better resting at home with their family. They can monitor them really closely and give them that extra care and attention they need. Okay, so the next thing we look at is knowing each child's individual needs and how this plays an important role in safe sleep and rest. So as family daycare educators, we are in a great position to develop genuine and respectful relationships with each of the children in our care. And this closeness and insight can play a valuable role in providing safe sleep. So we're in a great position as family daycare educators. We're really close to our families. We know our children really well. So this can be particularly important for children in that vulnerable age group from 0 to 12 months. And babies in this age group can vary greatly in terms of development. So one of the best things you can do as a family daycare educator is to get to know the child as an individual by ensuring open communication with their family. At the time of enrolment, you may want to find out details such as the child's birth weight, gestational age at birth, so was the child premature? And of course, this is all dependent on how much the family is willing to share with you, but it really bodes well. The more information you have, the better idea you can have of that child as an individual. You may ask them any history of illness that may impact sleep, such as respiratory conditions. Is the baby formula or breastfed? Is the baby exposed to risks in the home environment, such as tobacco smoke? Can baby roll over in their sleep? So really understanding where they're at with their physical development. Asking the family if they practice tummy time at home, and if not, you could maybe guide them. As the educator, you could guide them into some information about what they can do to strengthen that physical development. And asking, does baby have a teddy or a comforter in the cot, and how your service is best going to manage this? Because as we know, it is the recommendation that there is nothing in the cot, no pillows, teddies, for safe sleep practice. So that could be a conversation that you have with the families. Now, all these factors may require the child to be monitored with additional supervision at sleep time, as they may be at higher risk of SUDI. So remember, a child will always settle with greater ease when they're comfortable in their surrounds and have a positive bond with their educator. And as a family daycare educator, you can ensure that your home provides this for them. So the closer you are and the better you bond with the children, the more relaxed they're going to be and the better quality rest they're going to get. So let's have a look at a child's age and developmental abilities and how this relates to safe sleep. So a child's developmental ability and age can be an important factor when providing equipment and how to prepare children for rest and sleep. Babies should always be placed on their back when first put in the cot. Once the baby has been seen to repeatedly roll from back to front and back again on their own, they can be left to find a preferred sleep position. And this usually happens around 5 to 6 months of age. Babies younger than this who are not known to be able to roll from their front to back again on their own should be repositioned onto their back. So again, that could be part of your regular checks. If you go in and baby isn't known to be able to move back and forth on their own and you come in and they're rolled onto their tummy, best option is to put them back on their back. Tummy time should always be encouraged during waking hours to support baby's physical development. Educators should also stop wrapping or swaddling babies that can roll. So as soon as they do start to roll, no more wrapping or swaddling. They need to have their arms free so they can adequately support and move themselves. And children should move out of a cot when they're looking like they can successfully climb out themselves. Because what we're trying to avoid there is for them to attempt to climb out and only get halfway and have a bit of a bump. So as soon as they're showing signs of that, we can move them into more appropriate, more age-appropriate bedding. Okay, another thing we need to be aware of as educators, when should sleep and rest be provided? So some really common cues of children experiencing tiredness include yawning. So very much like us as adults, yawning, no longer wanting to participate in activities. They've clearly had enough, or they're just too physically tired to do anything. They may start crying a lot. They can no longer regulate their emotions. They become very emotional, impulsive behavior, and wanting comfort. So they get quite attached to you and they want that physical comfort. And as Seekwa reminds us, children who do not wish to sleep should be provided with alternate quiet activities and experiences. So sleeping should never be mandated. It shouldn't be, no child should be made to sleep. But these cues can certainly help us understand that children are in need of rest. So as an educator, we should never deny a chance to or force a child to rest. So we can't deny children to sleep if that's what they need, and we can't force it upon them if they're not wanting to. Although you will most likely have a set time within your daily routine for sleep and rest, and that's appropriate to have that designated time in your daily routine. Another important thing to consider is that if a child requests rest, or is showing clear signs of needing sleep, such as falling asleep in other parts of the day. And something that is really common is, children might not last through lunch because lunch is the last thing they do before rest time and they're just not getting there. And they start to do the head nods and the drifting off at the lunch table. There should always be a space available within your family daycare for the child to have quiet time and relax regardless of what time of day it is. So having that space available for them. Ensuring supervision is always still maintained. And if a child does fall asleep unexpectedly outside of the routine, ensure that they're moved to a little bed or a cot, depending on their age, a safe sleep environment, so that they can fulfill that need. And remember that we always need to be flexible with our daily routines, because they're just there to guide our daily practice. But if a child does fall asleep at other times of the day, of course, you can have that conversation with the family, but being available to provide that. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to take a short break with the presentation now, and I have a wonderful interview to show you. And this interview is with Bec Thornton. She is the National Health Promotion Manager from Red Nose. I interviewed Bec last month. And she was actually, I think it was end of January, and she was able to share some really fantastic advice and information. So I'm going to play this interview for you now, and then we'll come back and we'll finish the presentation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our interview. I'd like to give a very warm welcome today to Bec Thornton, who is the National Health Promotion Manager at Red Nose. Welcome, Bec.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's delightful to be here.
Great. So my name's Elizabeth. I'm presenting from Gadigal country today. Can I ask where you're coming to us from, Bec?
So I'm in the Yarra Ranges, which is the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I thought we'd start off by having a look at some good news statistics. So can you tell us or help us understand how Red Nose has minimised SUDI over the years and increased safety?
Absolutely. So there has absolutely been some great news to share. What we've really seen is that over the period since the Back to Sleep campaign started, which was sort of the early 90s, we saw a really dramatic drop in SUDI deaths. So just for clarification, sometimes people use SIDS and SUDI interchangeably. I'll use SUDI because it's a broader term and it captures more of the incidents that occur. But we've seen a really dramatic drop, and essentially we went from having around 300 deaths a year in Australia from SIDS alone, which is sort of the unexplained deaths, to 10 to 20 a year. So a really dramatic decline. And we know that's because of the safe sleeping interventions that have been implemented through public health campaigns, through organisations like Red Nose. So it's a really, it's a testament to the hard work that people like early childhood educators and parents at home have been putting in to keep their bubbies safe.
That's fantastic. That's such a good way to start our interview, is hearing those fantastic statistics. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so for our participants this evening, can you let us know what you feel are the key areas of concerns that family daycare educators could improve on, or what are the most commonly reported hazards?
Absolutely. So we have some themes that do occur, and whether it's often concerns from the educators themselves about, how do I go about meeting requirements and those sorts of things. So the key things that tend to pop up are around supervision. So people really want clear guidance on how to supervise appropriately, how to meet those requirements. We also get a lot of inquiries about how to manage conversations with parents where they might be requesting something that's not in line with the safe regulations or with legal guidance or policy. So being able to have those conversations confidently and in a supportive way is
Yeah.
really challenging, but it is definitely a learnable skill.
Yes.
And then I think the last one is probably around safe equipment, safe environment. So, is it okay to be using this type of product? Those sorts of questions. So we get a lot of those sorts of questions when we do education sessions with whether it's a centre or whether it's a group of FDC educators, and also certainly through our Safe Sleep line and online inquiry form as well. So they're definitely sort of the key themes that emerge on a regular basis.
Right. Oh, well, that's good, because a lot of the things you've mentioned are things that we talk a lot about in our session, and that there's also a lot of information in our booklet. So that's great that we're trying to combat those common hazards and issues. So the next thing, can I ask you a very common question? How often in our family daycare services should we be checking sleeping babies and children?
So this is always a challenging one, and I think so to preface this with, Red Nose doesn't have specific recommendations on timing because that is a governance issue. But what we know is that best practice involves being able to identify and respond immediately if a baby or young child is at risk. So that's the principle on which everything else is based. So really the most important thing is that supervision is active and effective. And from a regulatory and guidance perspective, we know that, for example, New South Wales Department of Education requires educators, whether it's in a service or whether it's in an FDC setting, to maintain adequate supervision of sleeping and resting children. And that involves being in sight and hearing, so we can identify that child at risk and respond immediately, and also physically checking children's breathing at least once every 10 minutes. So I think there's the continuing supervision to make sure that everything's tracking okay, and then there's that sort of closer physical check as well that helps keep bubs safe.
Fantastic. Great. Well, that gives us a really good overview of what those key factors are for effective checking. So that's fantastic. And you did mention about being able to communicate confidently with families. And we know as educators that we are in a great position, not only just to care for the children, but also to support and educate families that are in our care. So what's your advice who have families that may request things going against Red Nose safe sleep guidelines, such as bringing them in car bassinets and asking them to stay asleep, or using pillows for under 2-year-olds? As you mentioned, we can often get requests like that. So what would your recommendations be for educators?
It's so challenging. So I just, we recognise that it can be really confronting to have those conversations, particularly where parents are quite adamant. But I think the first thing with any conversation with a parent is to acknowledge what they're saying with empathy. So often the question that they're asking, or the request that they're making, is really based in a concern for their baby. So acknowledging that we're all on the same page, we want what's best for this baby, is a really good place to start, and it helps start you off on the right foot. I think then also understanding where this request is coming from. So often when parents are doing, talking about minimising disruption, so, I don't want them taken out of a capsule because they're not sleeping well. So then we can talk to them about, what can we do to help them settle better, so that we don't need to do the unsafe practice, but we can make sure that the baby's getting enough sleep. I think the take-home message, though, is always going to be, as someone who works with children, my concern is always their safety first and foremost, and everything else has to be secondary to that. So, whether it's a service, whether it's an FDC educator, we're following these recommendations to keep babies safe. But I think this is where really knowing those recommendations and having the confidence to explain them really helps. So if, the example that you gave for baby being brought in a capsule or car seat is really common. And I think, that's a great example of where, if you understand why a baby needs to be on a firm, flat surface for the safe sleep, why it's dangerous to have them in a sitting position when they're asleep, particularly if it's not in a car where you've got, the rear view mirror and you can be sort of eyes on all the time. We know that that's unsafe. We've got really good rationales for why we don't think that that's a safe thing to do. So then we can explain that to parents. And not only, as you said, we're in such a powerful position to work alongside families, not only to improve safety in the care setting, but also when they get home. If we're modelling the things that we need them to be doing, it's much more likely that they're going to do those things at home as well.
Wonderful, great. Yeah, really good points there. Thank you so much. So in regards to knowing each child's individual circumstances and needs in relation to sleep and rest, why is that so important that we need to know each child as an individual?
Beautiful. So all of the guidance sort of starts out with sort of minimum standards for a typical well baby.
Yes.
But then we need to take into account, as you said, the baby's individual circumstances and their medical history. So this is when knowing things like the risk factors that increase the risk of SUDI can be really helpful. So some of those risk factors might be, a baby who was born small for gestational age. So they were born small when they were they might have been at term, they might not have been premature, but they were born small, or they may have been early, or both. Prem babies are particularly vulnerable, but then also, babies who have an underlying health concern. So particularly things like ongoing respiratory conditions, or even just a cold, or, we try to encourage parents to keep puppies home when they're not well, but we all know that sometimes they slip through the doors anyway. If we know a baby's a bit under the weather, even if it's just that they're teething and they're throwing a bit of a temperature and they're just not quite right, knowing that, a mild illness can increase the risk a little bit. So just upping those regular checks to make sure that we're maintaining that really close supervision. So anytime you've got doubts, you're better off to increase the frequency of checking, just so that you can reassure yourself that the baby's okay, and so that you can intervene if there are any problems.
Fantastic, great. Well, thank you so much, Bec. We've learned so much from you today, and it's really, backed up all the information that we've provided in our session. So that's so fantastic. So to finish up, can you give us some key strategies that you'd recommend for family daycare educators to take away from today's session that you feel are most important for us to remember?
Absolutely. So I think really understanding the recommendations and the underlying rationales is probably the most important thing that any educator can do to help keep babies safe. So this, allows, as I said, safe practices while the baby's in your care, but also modelling of those safe practices. So knowing, not only that we always place babies on their back to sleep, but also why that's important, why it's so important to keep their head and face uncovered, why a smoke-free environment and a safe, clear cot are so critical. I think also, understanding the rationale behind things like policy. So understanding why regular checks, for example, are so protective, helps us maintain that standard, and also then reinforce those messages for families when they go home as well. So I think, keeping up to date through regular training, we know that the FDC educators in New South Wales have been amazing with, engaging with education through places like Red Nose. So I think keeping yourself informed and even just revisiting that knowledge on a regular basis so that you can really clearly articulate to a family, this is what we do here, here's how it keeps your baby safe, this is why it's important, is just so important.
Great, yeah, and I think that's what it's all about, just family daycare educators feeling empowered to implement all those fantastic recommendations and strategies that you give us. Well, thank you so much, Bec. It's been great interviewing you, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Bec.
Okay, wasn't that a great interview? Look at me, I'm here, there and everywhere. So a big thank you to Bec. She had some fantastic information in there for us. I should just note we have moved our interview to the middle of our session, so we've still got quite a lot of information to go. So hopefully you can stay around with us. We've got some other great things to go through in our presentation. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is preparing our policy for sleep and rest. Now, making sure that as an educator, you understand what your safe sleep and rest policy requires you to do, and seek additional training where needed. Now, your policy should reflect your service's philosophy on sleep and rest. It should include a background statement on why this policy is in place, include all legislative requirements as specified in the Education and Care National Laws and Regulations and any of the requirements in the NQS. It should explain how your service meets each requirement, contain links to other relevant policies such as administration of first aid, enrolment and orientation, child safe environments, all those things that could relate to sleep and rest, and summarise how the policy will be monitored, evaluated and reviewed, because we know that we always need to make sure that our policies go through that constant evaluation procedure. Okay. Now, a big part of that evaluation is to make sure that as part of your self-assessment process, that your policies and procedures, they still reflect practice that is happening day to day. So if you change the way you do things, you need to make sure that that's then reflected in your policies. And also to make sure that you're up to date with industry standards and compliance expectations. So if you've learned any new information tonight, which hopefully you have, you may wish to take that back to your service and review that within your policies. Now, when developing a safe sleep policy, some things to reflect on, and this is the policy checklist as provided by the New South Wales Department of Education in their Safe Sleep and Rest Policy Guidelines. They provide this checklist and they're really good points to reflect on. So I am going to read through them with you. The first one being, have you referenced the relevant regulations and are these reflected in your policy? So we showed you at the beginning of the session a big long list of all the laws and regulations that relate. So you could definitely go back to that and have a look at those. Does the title provide a clear and concise statement identifying the intent of the policy? Have you checked the policy requirements and reference relevant legislation that applies to your service type? So making sure that it's really well contextualized to family daycare. Does your policy statement provide a framework for decision making and ensure consistent practice? After all, that's really what we want from our policies, is to make sure that we're doing things consistently. Does your policy statement reflect your service philosophy? Are your best practice principles for sleep and rest for children reflected in your policy? And are the most up-to-date sleep and rest policies and procedures from Red Nose and ASEQA reflected throughout your policy and procedures? So this is a bit of a checklist that you could take away with you this evening and go and apply and review your policy back at your service. Now, to support your policy and to put them into everyday practice, you must then develop clear procedures. So the procedures tell us how we're going to put that policy into practice. And it should be clear step-by-step instructions on how you intend on implementing the requirements set out within your policy. And these should be clear and easy to follow. And when developing procedures, think about the following. So think about supporting documents that may need to be developed, such as safe sleep and rest supervision check records or the checklist that we looked at before. Where the procedure will be kept, so it needs to be easily accessible to refer to. And how you share procedures with the families, and best practice is to always include them in consultation. So asking them what they think and how they feel about this procedure or policy, and if they have any feedback. Other points to think of are how often they will be reviewed. Are they in line with your service philosophy? And do you need multiple procedures? So you might have a certain procedure for your little babies, 0 to 1 year olds, and then maybe a different procedure for your older toddlers, your 2-year-olds, and then even possibly different again for your older preschoolers. Or if you have if you have school age children, any kind of rest requirements that they may have. You also, in your procedure, you want to clearly define who is responsible. So the early childhood regulations clearly state who is held accountable for what. So whether it's the approved provider, the nominated supervisor, or the educator. And always identify and document any areas of improvement required as part of your self-assessment and quality improvement process. So the New South Wales Regulatory Authority created these tables, which you can see on the slide here, and they can be found in their sleep and rest procedure guidelines. So they will assist you in developing procedures specific to your service's needs and context. Referring to the Education and Care Services national regulations, when you're writing your procedures, will assist you ensuring that you're meeting your obligations. As you can see, who is specified in there. So the information for family daycare educators. So if we have a look, you can see there I have highlighted ones that specifically mention family daycare. So you can have a look at these as well. And there's some more there. So it'll say for family daycare services and what that entails for you. So you can see there's areas to include in your procedures. So for example, the one on the screen here, health, safety and supervision. It tells you the quality areas, the law, the regulations, things to consider and outline in each area. And again, it highlights that you need to contextualize this to your service. Strategies for monitoring and implementation of the procedure, and then any related policy and procedure. So it's a fantastic document, and I've highlighted those points there where they've specifically mentioned family daycare. So an example of a clear and detailed procedure for family daycare educators monitoring sleeping children's needs, 0 to 2 years. It says the educator will maintain adequate supervision of sleeping and resting children. This involves being within sight and hearing distance at all times and physically checking children's breathing by observing the rise and fall of their chest, their lip and their skin colour. Every 10 minutes, all checks need to be conducted in person at the cot side or side of the floor mattress or toddler bed for children who have moved on from a cot, and recorded at the time they occur. So not retrospectively, at the time that the checks are done. So that's an example of a clear procedure for a family daycare educator. And then you can see another good example here. And this is, if I just go back, this is under strategies for monitoring and implementation of procedures. It says for family daycare services, regular support from family daycare coordinator and meeting with other family daycare educators and family daycare educator assistants in the service to discuss safe sleep practices and any changes to service procedures. So as part of your procedure, they're saying that you really should be consulting with your coordinator, meeting with other educators in your service and discussing the practices around safe sleep so that you're evaluating this together. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at, another part of our role as early childhood professionals, includes supporting families. Now, family daycare educators should always be forthcoming in sharing information around their sleep and rest policies and practices. And keeping in mind, as a parent, it is something that they want to know about that. It's quite important to them. And so common questions that families may have for you as their family daycare educator, they may want to see, can I see where the children sleep? What do they sleep on? So what kind of surfaces or equipment do you have, whether it be cots or porta cots or little toddler beds? Can they bring something from home to comfort them? And what does that look like if we're not allowed to have things in the cot? When does the child get to have their comforter? Is furniture moved around? So is furniture moved around at rest time? How do you ensure that all children are safe? Do you stay with them? They might want to know how supervision occurs at rest time. How can you meet my child's individual needs? So they may tell you that their child has a medical condition and they may need some additional support there. And how is the environment made comfortable? So they may ask about things like noise, light, temperature, furniture, all those things that we spoke about, airflow. They might want to know a bit more about that. So we need to make sure that we're really forthcoming with that information and we reassure the families everything that we're doing. So like with all areas of care and development, families should be engaged in conversation about their child's individual sleep and rest needs. As educators, we need to be considerate of different cultures and values when it comes to sleep and rest. However, educators need to be careful when personal requests or expectations clash with professionally recommended advice. And I'm sure a lot of people have had experience with this. If you're ever concerned a family's request is going to cause risk or harm, or goes against your service policies, practices, or goes against any of the information you've heard tonight, you can seek guidance from your provider, your coordinator, and find a resolution or a compromise that meets the needs of the family in a safe and ethical way. So as an early childhood educator, you are encouraged to support the education of your families by sharing advice and resources from Red Nose and from the regulatory authority. So if the parent is requesting you to do something that you are advised against by Red Nose or the regulatory authority, you can have a conversation whether you feel comfortable to do it straight away or after engaging with your nominated supervisor, your coordinator, and have a chat and say, listen, my parent is requesting me to do this, but it actually goes against the safe sleep guidelines that we've learned from Red Nose. So what can we do about that? But if in doubt, never go against those recommendations, because as we said in the beginning, they are evidence-based practice and they're backed by a lot of research. So we know that they're giving the safest outcomes for the children. So it's really about informing the parents and the families of what you are willing to do within your policies and procedures and finding that compromise. So it's to be expected that from time to time we will have families with personal or cultural preferences that may not align with the Red Nose recommendations. And they may ask for their child to be put to sleep in their favourite rocker or have their child wearing a teething necklace while sleeping. And some conversations can be challenging. So I don't want to undermine that. It can be very difficult to have these conversations with families. But in this case, you can always refer to your safe sleep policies and procedures, which will reinforce how you manage sleep and rest at your service, and that your practice is evidence-based and guided by professional advice. So being able to communicate that with your families and letting them know about best practice, compliance, and the safety. If you're if you're in a conflicting situation with the family, it's essential to remember the following advice from the New South Wales Regulatory Authority. And I know this is quite a bit of text here, but I'm going to read through it because it's so important. So approved providers and educators should always follow the Red Nose Safe Sleeping Guidelines, even when a child's parent or carers request otherwise. The requirements under Section 167 of the National Law cannot be avoided by an agreement with families. So the only situation in which safe sleep practice may be modified is when the parents or carers have a certificate from their doctor in which the baby's doctor or the child's doctor recommends in writing that a baby sleep on their tummy or their side. In such cases, the service should consider conducting a risk assessment and formulating a risk minimization plan for that baby. So that's a really important point. The requirements under the national law cannot be avoided just because you've had a verbal agreement with the family to say, oh, okay, they requested this, we need to do this. So you always need to follow that research-backed advice. Now, if you have concerns, you should feel comfortable to speak with your coordinator or your service provider to resolve issues and ensure you stay true to your service procedure and best practice. In return, service providers must be available to support educators in their conversations with families regarding safe sleep practices. So when showing new parents or carers around your service, take the time to explain your service policies and procedures around infant sleep, especially back sleeping, and assure them that babies will practice tummy time when they're awake. Encourage families to follow through with these practices at home. That's also a really good point. We want to, big part of our role as educators and as early childhood experts, because that's what we all are, is to help inform the families as well so that they can carry through and do these safe sleep practices at home. Okay, so how are we going for time? We're almost there. So changes coming in 2023. This is something I just want to go through with you. There has been a noticeable reduction in SUDI deaths across Australia in recent decades. However, it does continue to be a high-risk area and a lack of awareness and knowledge about safe sleep remains. And this we see in the early childhood industry. So a key risk factor for SUDI is the vulnerable development period of babies between 0 and 12 months of age. So if you have that age group in your care, this is particularly relevant. As we continue to see an increase in the number of children under the age of 1 attending education and care services nationwide, the risk of SUDI is also increasing within the education and care sector. So we're seeing more and more children go into care, whether it be family daycare or other types of early childhood education. More and more children are entering care under the age of 12 months. And that may be because of all the financial pressures, parents needing to go back to work sooner. So we are seeing a high volume of enrolment of that age group. So therefore, we will soon see amendments to the national laws and regulations, as well as associated guidance documents, such as the guide to the NQF. It's important that we're continually reviewing what we do and how we do it to ensure the safety of the children. So there's 3 key changes for providers and educators regarding sleep and rest policies and procedures. So most changes are expected to come in from around mid-2023 this year in all states and territories. However, as you see tonight, there has already been an abundance of supportive documents published by the New South Wales Regulatory Authority and ASIQA to support educators in achieving compliance with the amended legislation. So a lot of that supportive documentation has already come into play and is already available. If you start researching safe sleep, as we did to put this package together for you tonight, there is an abundance of material, which is fantastic because it allows you to prepare and get ready before these changes come into play. The key changes are as follows, and these have been sourced directly from the NQF review, the 2019 Decision Regulation Impact Statement. So the first change is specifying in the national regulations what must be included in a service's policy and procedure for sleep and rest. So previously it was really up to a service what they had in their policy and procedure, but the regulations are now going to clearly define what must be included. So while services are already required to have policies and procedures in place relating to sleep and rest, this change means that legislation will specify the minimum content that must be included. The second change that we will see are requiring that a risk assessment be conducted in relation to sleep and rest. So this means services will be required to conduct a risk assessment, including specific matters that must be considered as a minimum in the assessment. So you'll have to do a risk assessment for sleep and rest. And the last change that we see come into play is legislative change to require compulsory training on safe sleep practices for all family daycare educators. So this one's family daycare specific, subject to governments undertaking further research, costing and impact analysis of any proposed training and implementation options. So this will improve educators' knowledge on safe sleep practices and better prepare them to deliver these practices on a day-to-day basis. Improvements in daily practice will result in greater safety for children, especially infants who are at high risk of SUDI. So those are the three key changes that are coming into play. Now, as I mentioned, there is a wealth of information, resources and knowledge available for you as family daycare educators and the sector as a whole to support safe sleep and rest. And the New South Wales Regulatory Authority has released a series of great resources, and these were released some in 2021, some in 2022. And these include the Sleep and Rest for Children Policy Guidelines and the Procedure Guidelines for Early Childhood Education and Care Services. So I highly recommend that you have a look at those. A lot of the information we provided tonight have been from these resources. Regulatory guidance, so Children's Safe Sleep and Rest 2022. That's a document that's now available. Family Daycare Safe Sleep Resources, and they were made in partnership with Red Nose, and Safe Sleep Poster in partnership with Red Nose. So these are some resources that you can access. In August 2022, the New South Wales regulatory body launched a Safe Sleep and Rest Regulatory Priority Program. So it was deemed top priority to increase the knowledge and awareness and information around safe sleep practices. The desired outcome of this program was to provide an extensive range of guidance and resources to the sector, specifically on safe sleep and rest. It also aims to minimise common risks in services and encourage quality practice to ensure and promote the health and safety of all children in care. These resources can assist family daycare educators ensuring they are meeting compliance and safety standards, and greatly benefit children in achieving the most out of their learning environments and educational programs by achieving adequate sleep and rest. So further resources and information can be found on the Department's Safe Sleep and Rest website. So if you go to education.nsw.gov.au/early childhood education, and there's a whole resource library there on safe sleep. So that's a great place to start if you're looking for some additional information. And then something else you can also have available to yourself in your home. There's the Red Nose Professionals Hub, which is a fantastic web link there. And then there's their contact details. So you can call them on their 1300 number. They're available 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And they also have an email address, so you can contact them. Now you can visit that Red Nose website, their professionals hub. They have fantastic pages specifically for early childhood professionals. You can book in safe sleep training, download fact sheets for yourself or your families. We spoke about sharing information with our families, and they also provide those fact sheets in all different languages, which is really great if you've got families from different cultures. You can download the posters for your service, and they're also on social media, so you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram. I also highly recommend that you subscribe to their e-newsletter, which you can do via their website, and you'll always be up to date with their current news. So that's a great first step you can take after tonight's session, is to go and sign up to their newsletter. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our session this evening. I hope you have enjoyed it and you've learnt some really fantastic information. As we did with last month, I've got a little poll here that we're going to do. I'm going to take a short break for you to complete this poll. There's just 6 short questions for you to reflect on and to have a look at what we've learnt tonight. Once we've done that, we do have a bit of time for some questions, so I'll come back and we'll do some questions. But for now, I'm going to launch that poll for everyone, and then we'll give you a few minutes, and then I'll share those results with you as well. Okay, so everyone should have that poll now. If you can take a minute to answer those questions, a bit of a reflection for everyone on what we've learnt this evening, and then I'll share the results with everyone once we're done. Okay, thank you everyone for completing that poll. So just to go through the responses that have come through. The first question, physical checks of sleeping children include, and the correct answer was all of the above. So monitoring the rise and fall of the child's chest, monitoring lip colour and skin colour. The second question we had, what should be an educator's priority for professional practice? And the correct answer was, which everyone got, following safe sleep guidelines and compliance set out by Red Nose and the New South Wales Regulatory Authority, and supporting families to understand these requirements. The third question we had was, what is an appropriate frequency to conduct physical checks on sleeping children? And the correct response was every 10 minutes. At what age can a child be provided with a pillow? And we got 2 years or older. And question 5, Australian and New Zealand safety standards apply to both cots and portable cots, true or false? The correct answer was true. And the last question, what elements contribute to a safe sleep environment? Adequate ventilation, uncluttered spaces, comfortable temperature, appropriate lighting, and of course it was all of the above. So thank you so much everyone. That's a really good recap of some of the important points that we learned this evening. So we are finished our session. We've got a few minutes left for some questions. I have been monitoring them as they came through this evening. Not too many, but there are a few. One of them was, do we need to check children over 2 years every 10 minutes? So that 10-minute guideline, it certainly is appropriate for under 2 years. And my response would be yes, it is really important to still do those physical checks for toddler age, preschool age, making sure that you're checking on the children, because we just don't know, what can happen if we're not supervising. And there was also a bit of confusion because we've noted that the children should be in sight and in hearing distance at all time. You should be able to see and hear them at all time. But where we differentiate between that and these 10-minute physical checks is with the physical checks, we're really zoning in on one particular child and looking at their skin color, lip color, rise and fall of the chest. But outside of those 10-minute physical checks, you still should be able to see and hear the children. They should be in a close enough proximity that you're maintaining supervision at all times. But then those 10-minute physical checks are really zoning in and focusing on one child at a time. Another question that came through was, do I need to record checks for all age groups? So yes, definitely you want to be recording, even if you're doing the 10-minute checks on, say, a couple of 3-year-olds, you want to show evidence that those checks were conducted, that you were doing that physical check. Another question that came through, a parent requests that I do not let their child sleep. Obviously the parent's very stressed because if they do sleep during the day, the child's not going to sleep until very late at night. So I think this is a very common problem. So where do you stand? Because we did talk about making sure that we provide for each child's needs. So I guess it really comes down to revisiting your policies on what you do and making sure that you're meeting the needs of the child. So it might be as simple as finding a compromise to say, okay, well, the family's telling me that if I allow this child to sleep, it's going to have a negative impact on their evening sleep or throw out their whole routine. So maybe a compromise could be providing an opportunity for that child to have a couple of rest sessions throughout the day so they're not fatiguing themselves. So maybe after morning tea and after lunch, that child has some quiet time, maybe, read some books instead of having some really physical activity all throughout the day. So finding some kind of compromise. So understanding where the parent's coming from and communicating that with them and say, I understand we don't want to negatively impact the child's evening sleep, but this child is very tired throughout the day. So where could we compromise so that we're meeting that child's needs? Could it be a case of them just having some quiet time with a story instead? And another question that came through was, do I need to remove hoodies or risky items like jewelry for children over the age of 2? And I would say best practice, yes, just because even with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, if they've got a hoodie or if they've got cords, and it's when children are kind of drifting off to sleep and they're getting a little bit restless, they tend to pull on their cords, and or even if they've got a necklace on, we just don't know what can happen during sleep time. And because you are monitoring multiple children and not just watching the one child, the safest option is any risks, we're just going to eliminate that so that you can be more relaxed in what you're providing the children, knowing that, okay, I've eliminated those risks and there's no way that could cause harm to the child. So if there's anything questionable like hoodies or cords or jewelry, even if the child is over 2, I would still be asking them to remove it for sleep time. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your great questions. And of course, if you think of anything later on, please post on our Facebook group, or you're welcome to email us at a later time if you think of anything. But that does bring us to the end of our session. So as I mentioned, go and join our Facebook page. And I'd like to thank the New South Wales Department of Education, who has funded this through their sector development program. And we really look forward to seeing you next month for our next PD in Your Pocket topic. So, and that will be on emergency management in family daycare. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for taking the time on this soggy night and learning a lot. I hope you picked up some great information about safe sleep. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month. Bye.